Hey folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat, and strangely, this is a stream not about crypto. This is a bit of an indulgence for me. For those of you who have watched this channel for any period of time, I'm into physics and I'm into energy and technology and those type of things. And I think I've discovered something. I was made aware of something that I think is a massive breakthrough, not only in propulsion, but also in energy generation. And its implications, I think, are tremendous. And to see it happening in real time, it's like I read all sorts of things about Einstein or about Tesla or about these things in the past, and we kind of lift these people up and we're like, oh, these people. I believe that there is a man named Dr. Charles Buhler who is kind of a modern day, practical physicist who has done something incredible. And I want to tell you about it today because I'm completely fascinated with it, but its implications are really tremendous. And it's something I've always felt in my life that we would see a new energy source. And I want to talk to you about it. I want to fire you up because there's not a whole lot of good news in crypto. So let's talk about something we could be excited about a future that is abundant. And that fits really well with what we talk about on this channel. But thanks for being here. I got a lot of energy. Yeah. And we're going to talk about energy today. Let's say hello to you and then we'll get into the content. This is really cool stuff. If you're into this stuff, I would ask you to share this out, like it, subscribe to it, whatever you want to do with it. But this is going to be really cool. If you're into tech, this will be kind of fun. So my purpose here in this stream is to help you be aware of what is going on in this breakthrough of massless propulsion, which if you just even think about those terms together, you're like, what are you talking about? Crypto compassion, change is coming. That's pretty much the only thing that's consistent, isn't it? Good to see you. Thanks for being here. KDM Halo, thanks for being here. Sam Kemp, that would be humongous game changer. Absolutely. And I think it is. I really think it is. And when you see, you're going to hear about this and we'll talk about it. I'm going to give you the links. You're going to be able to go and dive into this, go down this rabbit hole as much as you want, but it's practical stuff. It's the stuff I like. It's not the, kind of woo-woo UFO stuff, although I do like that stuff a little bit, but it's real science and it's a real breakthrough that I think is really interesting. And I love how it came about. And you're going to learn about that today. Hexander says, this seems way more interesting than the meeting I'm chairing right now. I'll go on mute there and listen in here. How funny is that? You're chairing a meeting and you're going to listen to this. I love it. I love it. It's called multitasking, I think. Taryn kind of challenged some theories, huh? Makes one ask, what else has been theorized that may be incorrect? Well, you know what, Taryn, I know you can relate to this because we talk a lot on this channel. You comment about it. There are many, many things that are unseen. And if you think about creation is one of abundance, it wouldn't surprise me. And I'm going to make I've got some theories of my own of what I think that this is indicative of and what is actually potential, how it all fits together, which is pretty fun. Trix, what's up, Trix? Trix has got a new track that he dropped, DCA, baby. He let me do the intro for that. Trix, you're awesome. Thanks, man, for being here. Appreciate that. Wick 8, we are doing it. That's right. Hex Honcho's here. Good afternoon, all. Finn Bear. Dude, I was talking about you yesterday. I wonder if your ears were ringing, if you will. Hello, everyone. You all need to follow the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project on YouTube. They're breaking physics as we know it. Ether's real. Dude, Finn Bear, that's going to be the topic today. This is so great that you're into this stuff too. I just love it. A lot of us that are in crypto are very optimistic about the future. I mean, you have to be, right? Especially in the Richard Hart ecosystem. You're like, if you just go based on the evidence, it's pretty tough, but we believe. Crypto compassion. Let's go. Hans, what's going on? I'm here for the tech. Dude, I love it. Yeah, I'm in it for the tech today too. Magnus, hey folks, and Casey Hex, howdy. All right, here we go. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to play for you an interview, just the overview right now, and then we'll dig into it. We got some patents, we got some different things, but as an intro, and what's up, Pulse Chain Trainer? Good to see you. Appreciate you. All right, so the Biefeld-Brown effect. So check this out. So Townsend Brown, you may have heard that name before. Townsend Brown was the guy when he was 16 years old. So he was born in 1905. In Townsend Brown, when he was 16 years old, if you can believe this, imagine your 16-year-old playing with high voltage. he noticed when he was dealing with these needle apparatus that he was getting motion from high voltage with a certain geometry. And that's kind of at the basis of all of this breakthrough. But Townsend Brown is well known. You've probably seen the work that he did later in life around lifter technology, which is really what's called ion wind. And so when he was 16 years old, I guess at Denison University, one of the professors there saw what he was doing as a 16-year-old. And there is an effect named after, and it's called the Biefeld-Brown effect. And that's named for the Professor Biefeld and Brown, which was Townsend Brown, when he was 16 years old, which is really, really cool. But this is based on the concept of electrostatics and asymmetric capacitors. And that's sounds kind of, techie, but it's really, really cool. And it's neat what they've basically discovered here. So I just wanted to say that at first because there may be some references to it. But let's share with you this this overview, and then we'll dig into it. Let's share the screen. All right, share screen. Charles, this is Dr. Charles Buhler. He was head of electrostatics at NASA. He's got Exodus, Propulsion Technologies, and let's take a listen to him.
With me.
Well, thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, let me start out with the big news. Your team has built and patented a new type of propulsion device that is currently producing over 1 Earth gravity of force, uses no propellant, and in careful testing in hard vacuum, it indicates that the force generated is not based on known effects, such as ion, wind, or conventional electrostatic forces. So do you have kind of a short elevator pitch description that you can give us for what this is and how it works?
Sure. Essentially, what we've discovered is that systems that contained an asymmetry in either electrostatic pressure or some kind of electrostatic divergent field can give a system of a center of mass a non-zero force component. So what that basically means is that there is some underlying physics that can essentially place a force on an object should those two constraints be met. So technically, those terms are called asymmetrical capacitors that have been around for quite a while, would fall in that category, but there are other types that would fall into that category. So that's the 10,000 foot pitch.
Yeah, 10,000 foot view.
Yep.
All right, so there we go. So asymmetric capacitors. So if you know what a capacitor is, it's basically two plates with a dielectric in between. And if you've ever seen a Leyden jar is basically it's a jar, and it on the outside, let's say it has a copper cup, and on the inside it has a copper sleeve, if you will. And you load that up with high voltage, for example, and it'll retain the field within the dielectric. It's actually not in the plates, it's in the dielectric. So what is a dielectric? So a dielectric is essentially an insulator. This could be just about anything, right? Anything like plastics. There's a lot of plastics that are obviously dielectric. Glass is a great example of that. But the idea of capacitance is essentially you're holding a charge within this dielectric. What he has discovered, and I think that there's the big part of this discovery, which I'm just absolutely fascinated with, is the fact that once you load this, okay, so once you charge it, you don't need a continuous current. Okay, so basically the field gets set up, and it's done in a way that is in an asymmetry. And so let's talk about asymmetry in general. So if you think about air or water, you have an asymmetry in, for example, a wing of an airplane, right? You've got one area which is curved, right? So it takes longer for the air to go across the top section than the bottom section, and it creates essentially an asymmetry, which is lift. The same thing if you had a propeller in water, right? The geometry of the propeller makes it move. So as a kind of a silly example of this, let's say we were in a canoe, me and Finn Bear, we're in a canoe, and we just have sticks, right? They don't touch the bottom, and we're trying to row with something that is, shaped like this, just a stick. Well, we might move a little bit, but not much. But if we were to change the geometry at the end of the oar, make an oar and make a flat section of it, and we turn that sideways in the water, we'd be able to push the water out of the way. And so what matters a lot in engineering is the geometry of things that are enable us to push against. Well, the big breakthrough here is the fact that depending on the shape and geometry of the capacitor, you create an asymmetry, and that essentially moves the center of mass. What they're saying is that in complete vacuum, and this would obviously have its implications to like space travel. So if you're out of Earth's gravity and you are in a total vacuum, that in theory, what you're doing is um, you charge this thing up. It's got the field, and until that field breaks down, which is potentially never, you're going to continuously have a force applied. So the big question is, what in the world is it pushing against? And one of the great things, if you watch this interview with Tim Ventura and Charles Buhler, you'll notice that he actually discovered this kind of by accident. His wife is also a physicist. He was with NASA. He's obviously started his own company. And he actually put a needle inside of like literally a plastic tube and taped it up, put high voltage on it, but it wasn't so high that it created corona. So if you know anything about ion wind or lifters, you're putting so much high voltage in that it actually creates a discharge, and that discharge will ionize the air. And of course, that's called ion wind. That's the Biefeld-Brown effect. That was discovered long ago. And you've probably seen that where you hear that crackling sound and you see kind of almost like, looks like a little bit of lightning coming off the end of it. That's called corona discharge. This does not include that. Well, what's interesting is you would think that if it was a rocket and had a tip to the rocket, that you would move, backwards, right? So it would push out mass from the back, then move you this way. Well, what's interesting about these asymmetric capacitors is actually they go in the direction of the point, which is really fascinating. So they go in kind of the opposite direction of what you would assume they would, which is absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to show you an example here of from the patent. So this is Charles Buhler's patent. And let's systems and methods. There it is. So this is just a simple example. And he's got a number of scenarios here. So if you take a look at this, where the arrows are, and this is interesting, kind of a teardrop shape. If you look at where the center of mass would be, this is this kind of XY axis, that based on the configuration of this, you would have essentially an asymmetry. Well, the direction of movement is actually to the left, which you would not expect. And he shows a number of examples of this, of designs that they've used. What's amazing to me is they've gotten to the point now, and this patent is from 2018. They're about to release a new patent, and they have exceeded 1 G of gravity. Think about the implications of that. Okay. So if you're able to utilize asymmetric capacitors where you just literally load them with charge and they move, they're not connected. And that's the interesting thing, because there's a load, you load them up, you can actually disconnect them. And as long as the charge state is there, they're going to move and accelerate. Well, that's really challenging to current physics. And this is what's amazing about it. I'm going to play some stuff here from Charles that's going to talk about this. But this has implications. He's worked out the math, and essentially in the quantum theory, and I'm going to butcher this, but I'm going to give you my best, thought process here, is that in quantum, mechanics and quantum math, you have this concept of 0-point energy. There's a lot of people that would call it different things, like the quantum vacuum or quantum fluctuations. And if you know about the Casimir effect is if you get two plates really, really, really close together, they end up sucking together. And there's all kinds of, if you look at the Casimir effect of what's happening there, Charles Buhler actually has some additional thoughts, because from his work and research, he has actually done the math. And when you do the physics math on this, it really, it becomes a huge breakthrough. And so he talks about the implications of what he's discovered, not just experimentally, but also mathematically, that could explain a lot of other things that they've experienced. For example, there's a thing that is really troublesome to NASA, is they have these satellites, and when the satellites go through the Van Allen belt, they change their velocity, and this is a real big challenge to the folks at NASA with determining and managing satellite trajectories. Well, what he basically said is when it passes through the Van Allen belt, it's getting charged, and just based on the geometry of these satellites, he believes that they're getting charged in an asymmetrical way, and it's changing their velocities because of this mathematics, basically based on what he has discovered. The implications of this are absolutely tremendous, because right now the way they're looking at it is, okay, this is a way in which we can, out in space, we can have propellantless motion. But what's really interesting is, since he started, and this really started back in 2016, they're now to the point where they've exceeded 1G. That means Earth gravity itself. So the implications for this long term, if it gets scaled up, isn't just, oh, let's get satellites and we can push things out into deep space and they will continue to accelerate. But he jokes, and I think this is hilarious. He says one of the problems is, if you look at Einstein's equations, if you take any mass and you put it out in space and it continues to accelerate, right? So let's say you charge up, some very, very small light thing and it's space junk, right? In theory, based on Einstein's equation, if you continue to go closer and closer to the speed of light, right, you don't bump into something, that literally the mass of that object increases infinitely, and it ultimately creates a black hole, which is kind of funny. Can you imagine that? You get a piece of styrofoam that's charged, and next thing you know, it turns into a black hole. Very, very interesting. Let's say hello to a couple of you new folks that I'm seeing in here. Magnus, what's going on? Casey Hacks, good to see you. Finn, oh yeah, Pulse Chain Trainer, I said hello. It takes a special breed of fool to be here for sure. Well, yes and no, but you're here, so welcome. Electricity happens in the space around the wire, not in it. It is a common misunderstanding, of course, right? And when you think about what's the right-hand rule, man, right? The electromagnetic wave. Why do we have shielding in coax cables? Because of this, right? It's the electromagnetic wave, right? Electricity, man, you know what you're talking about. All right, let's jump back into to Charles Buhler and listen to this. It's fascinating.
Before we go further, we should acknowledge that claims about field effect propulsion surface regularly. These are something that come up, every couple of years. Someone comes out and says, look, I have something, and usually those can be attributed to experimental error or, again, well-explained forces like ion wind. So what I want to do is remind the audience that you have done careful design and testing with these issues in mind. You knew about this going into it. You have been working on this for several years. And I also want to point out and remind people that you are NASA's subject matter expert on electrostatics. So if anyone would know about conventional explanations for anomalous measurements, it would be you, right?
That's true. And going into this, we did not, expect electrostatics to be the answer. As I described before, we were looking at other types of momentum initially for, 20, 25 years or so. But nature has its own way of doing things, and our job is to uncover what nature does. It just happened to fall into my lap as what I'm the expert in. So we take that as it is. So.
I do want to get into the patent. Again, this is fully patent protected. And the patent is entitled A System and Method for Generating Forces Using Asymmetrical Electrostatic Pressure. So this is your first patent on this technology, but I understand you have more on the way. And currently, as things stand, this is fully protected, not only based on what you've observed, but also the model that you've created to optimize it for propulsion applications, right?
Yeah, I think that's what makes us unique among other potential discoveries in this field, is that we have a theory, we test to the theory, then the theory leads to a model, the model leads to computations, and then the engineering leads to the design. So you have to have those three things working in conjunction to have a path forward, at least in my opinion. You want the theory, the modeling, and the experiment all to mesh. And that's what's unique about this. And that's what makes it very exciting. And that's what led to such a significant amount of progress in just a short amount of time. So, and we keep testing it every day to validate it. So it's right on track. So we think we have a good handle on it. So yes.
So the term, and again, this comes right out of the patent, the term asymmetric electrical pressure is similar to Thomas Townsend Brown's research into asymmetrical capacitors back in the 1950s, as well as effects observed earlier in antique Fizeau condensers, which have also been called the gravity capacitor. So what makes your device unique from these, and what led to it being patentable?
Well, I think what led it to be different in those older papers and that older subject matter is probably valid for most of the point. For most, it's unfair to say that it's not. However, without a theory back then to describe it, it was hard for them to miniaturize it, to optimize it, all of those things you want to do to make it a useful force. And like you said earlier, in doing so, when you're playing with high voltages, high fields, and asymmetrical capacitors, you're going to uncover things that are not the force that we're looking for, like ion wind thrusters and lifters and all these other things. It certainly get forces, but not for the reasons that that we're looking for. So it's all mixed in there. It's all jumbled in there together. So without a sound approach, I think our patent stands out that tells you this is the effect, this is where it comes from. Now let's miniaturize it. And as I said before, the asymmetrical capacitor component of this, we're not building asymmetrical capacitors anymore, right? That's a geometry thing. But there are other ways to take advantage of the electrostatic pressure forces. The asymmetrical capacitors is a nice, handy, inexpensive way of doing that, but it's not the way we're moving forward with it. So that's captured in that patent, but also the follow-on patent.
I want to pop open the slide deck and show people one of the slides from your recent presentation. I'm going to put a link to this in the show notes, but I want to get into the propulsive forces. And I think for me, this was the part that blew me away. This is incredibly exciting. And this goes to what you were saying about optimizing it and building the model. So let me share that. So in terms of propulsive force, you have built several hundred experimental device variations. And between 2014 and 2021, and I think that this graph reflects that, they all produced what appears to be less than 1,000th of an Earth gravity of force. Now that changed in 2021, and you have rapidly increased up to slightly over 1G of force. So can you tell me what led to this dramatic increase in propulsive force output? And also, how much farther do you think you might be able to take this using current design and technology?
Sure. So what we have here, like I said, is a graph of our progress. It doesn't represent all of the tests, and it certainly doesn't represent all of the models that we've tested. That's numbers close to 1,000. But here's a few select that we put together just to kind of show the highlight of the progress. So from 2016 to 2020, like I said, those are basically the conventional asymmetrical capacitors that you'd see in the textbooks. With a twist, we encased them. And I don't think they've ever been encased, in styrofoam to make sure that they didn't leak charge. We definitely did that on purpose, and they still worked. So that's kind of what sets us apart from the old T. Thomas Brown stuff. A lot of that stuff was in air with tens of thousands of volts. We shy away from that. We go to much lower voltage, and we try to encapsulate everything. The big advantage, the big jump in 2020, 2021 was a few things. The first thing was the presence of the high vacuum system. So now once we move things into high vacuum, now you can eliminate some of the sources of noise and errors, like the ion wind, any kind of gas discharge, corona discharge, glow discharge, brush discharge. You try to eliminate any kind of current leakage, essentially current leakage. Anytime there's current in our system, the force goes away. So it's very odd. The second thing is the type of thrusters. We went away from the asymmetrical capacitor thrusters to kind of the two-dimensional thin film type. Okay, so we had different dielectrics sandwiched next to each other. That's a different way to make an asymmetrical field on one ground plate versus the other high voltage plate. It's a very simple way to do it. And that's also covered in the patents. So once we began to do that, one of the dielectrics was vacuum. And when you apply high enough voltage, the third thing that we learned, and probably the greatest thing that we learned, is that there's two types of charges, and each type of charge produces a different level of thrust. In electrostatics, the thrust is, there's two types of charges. There's called free charge and there's bound charge. So free charge is what's in a conductor, and bound charge is basically what's in an insulator, if you want to be plain about it. And what we discovered is that throughout all of the tests, even back to 2016, 2017, there have been mixtures of both. And we really didn't understand that until the 2020 tests that we performed. And once we understood that, that allowed us to make thrusters optimized to take advantage of the bound charge. So the bound charge, although it produces higher thrust, it's a little bit more difficult to manipulate because you're dealing with insulators. So, but that's kind of where we're headed now. That's kind of the direction that we're going into now. So now we're moving beyond thin films to more chemical battery-based type of thrusters where we actually can inject these charges directly.
All right, I'm going to pause here because I'm going to make a connection that wasn't made in this video. And I want you to see this because this is really interesting. I don't know if you know this, but back in the 1950s, there was a foundation that was created, and it was called the Gravity Research Foundation. And the Gravity Research Foundation was founded by a guy by the name of Roger W. Babson. And I want you to see this because at about 10 different universities across the United States, Charles, um, Roger Babson, and subsequently Professor Witten's father were working on anti-gravity research back in the 50s. And he felt so compelled to promote this, the work that they were doing, that he decided to pay for stone monuments to be put at 10 different universities across the United States so students would see them. Now, I want you to pay attention. What we just talked about, or what Charles just talked about, was this fact of free and bound charges in a dielectric, which is an insulator. Okay. So now take a look at this. This is from 1960s. This is when these got erected. But check this out. This like gives me chills when I look at it. So check this out. This is from Tufts University. And Tufts University, all the monuments are the same, and he paid for these to be put at 10 different universities. And this says, this monument has been erected by the Gravity Research Foundation, Roger W. Babson, founder. It is to remind students of the blessings forthcoming when a semi-insulator is discovered in order to harness gravity as a free power and reduce airplane accidents, 1961. So think about this. In the 1950s, Roger Babson and the father of Edward Witten, who is like the premier theoretical physicist, who has the most, acclaimed physicist in the world, Edward Witten's father worked with Babson on anti-gravity research. My opinion is likely they knew about this back then. And so somebody just commented that we knew this for 75 years. Yeah, very, very good chance we did. And now it's essentially not being militarized, but it's being allowed to be patented. But isn't this ironic? And it's just so cool that these are stone monuments at 10 different universities. Think about the amount of effort and energy and money you'd have to spend to basically say it is to remind students of the blessings forthcoming when a semi-insulator is discovered in order to harness gravity as free power. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And that's something that you won't see in the connection between this. So let's continue with this, but it's so big. And I'm a nerd, so I'm into that stuff. All right, let's continue.
Instead of tribocharging or doing something, just by charge injection or induction charging, there are other ways to actually get that charge into the dielectrics.
So now just to ask, free charges, that would be kind of like electrons that are traveling in a wire, right? And bound charges would be electrons that are actually in an atom and they can't go anywhere.
Well, they'd be in a dielectric medium. So they're, they're embedded in a plastic or a epoxy or a Kevlar, any kind of insulator.
Oh, okay.
Styrofoam. So those are real charges too. Those are bound charges.
And I'm glad that we were able to put this slide up. And again, you did a very lengthy, detailed presentation on this. So people looking at the slide deck, they can see the slides on the left. You have incredible detail that you went through. I'm going to link to this in the notes for anyone who wants more information. And that way we can really just provide maximum value on what you have already described, because it was so detailed and in depth. But going back to the force output slide, this is what got me really excited. Now, years ago, I worked on lifters. I'm familiar with B-Field Brown. I even built a couple of failed gravity capacitor attempts back in the day. And so these dots down here, in the 1,000th of a G range, these are definitely representative of everything that was documented, up until very recently. And when I saw your graph, I saw this evolution of design that you've done, right? And I felt like they've dialed this in. It's like the model that you've created allowed you to start to optimize this. And as you dial that in, you can just watch those thrust outputs increase and increase and increase. And it almost looks like an exponential curve. So one thing I wanted to ask was, how far do you think you could take this with current technology in terms of gravities? And if, again, hypothetically speaking, if NASA handed you a blank check and said, you know what, do as much as you can, how far do you think that this could go with like the latest and greatest in terms of, material electronic components?
No, I think it can go quite far, to be honest. Right now, as I said, we're dealing with the battery world, so the chemical versions of these things. They're no longer thin films. They're basically liquids, essentially, that are applied to surfaces. So they're basically crappy batteries, and we're trying to optimize the chemistry to optimize the charge injection. And once we do that and apply our fields, we'll see our force. So that's why the force keeps getting higher and higher, because we are more microscopic. And as we become more microscopic, the mass of our system goes way down and our thrust stays pretty high. So that's what's exciting about it. Now, how far can we go? We're only doing DC. We haven't even done a lot of AC in these tests, which is pretty cool. We've done AC up to a few, megahertz or so, but the effect doesn't scale with frequency as you would expect, because it's not photon based, it's field based. So, but we do know that there are other versions of our thrust that can take advantage of RF, and we will discuss those in the future as well. Once we prove them out, those are just theoretical. So the sky's the limit, really. How much bound charge can you fit in something? How much, if you think of a car battery, how much free charge is in a car battery? A lot of charge is in a car battery. A lot of current is stored in there. A lot of energy is stored in there. So right now we're just kind of optimizing that in a two-dimensional system, and then.
All right, so I want to basically put an exclamation point on certain things here. What he's talking about is a free charge would be essentially the wire connecting to the capacitor to load it up. Once they load up the capacitor, and in this case, he's saying these aren't just asymmetric capacitors, because they went from basically geometric shapes of capacitors to then thin films. And if you think about thin films, imagine just layered plastic, and each of the plastics has a different band gap, I guess is what you'd call it, and its ability to be broken down in a capacitor, meaning that the charge would jump across plates. Well, they're basically saying we use different thin films, and that created our asymmetry. Now to the point where they're thinking in terms of liquids. Okay, so if you think about an electrolyte in a battery, so many cases what happens is in the electrolyte is actually the stored charge. So you think about lithium ion batteries and all of those type of things. You've got a current collector, you've got this electrolyte. Well, what he's basically saying is it's getting to the point where essentially these are going to be essentially high voltage capacitors that hold charge. And I mentioned a Leyden jar at the beginning of this. I mean, there have been people who have created Leyden jars with like a 5-gallon bucket and salt water, and those can kill you. They can store so much electric charge that they can kill you. And what we don't realize, and I think that this is the implications are tremendous, is this has implications in battery technology, but it also has implications in free energy. And why in free energy? Well, if you've got the ability to create motion exceeding 1 g of gravity, okay. Now they're doing this in very, very small. The mass of the things that they're doing is extremely small. So this to me is breakthrough new tech. But in my opinion, if the powers that be out there, and this is the military industrial complex, doesn't, basically shut them down, right? And in private, basically classify all of this information, what we will gain from this, I think, will give Charles Buhler a Nobel Prize. This is the kind of stuff. This is a breakthrough. And if you're really interested in diving into the mathematics of this, because this is really where I think this sits. What we're talking about here is kind of the high level implications of it, but he goes through in detail in the seminar that he does about how the math works. And what's so cool is you're onto something when your equations, everything else that we've discovered in the past, get kicked out of your equation. Like you're seeing other things. It basically is fitting with either the classical or the quantum models. And that's really, really exciting. And you can tell when he presents this stuff, he knows like, hey, we figured something out. But what I love about this is that most of the things that are breakthroughs are kind of accidental. And this is no different. When he first had kind of the inclination that there was something special here, all they did was took one of these needles that they were using, which is the asymmetric geometry and they just jabbed it into styrofoam. They wanted to like isolate it and contain it. And that kept the corona discharge from leaking out. And it's amazing. Then they went to things like epoxies and, you think about this is very solid state stuff. And it's weird to imagine that you could load something up with high voltage and just let it sit and it's going to move. Well, that's in theory where we are. So what would happen if think about a water wheel, right? Or any wheel for that matter. if you've got the ability to affect propulsion in excess of 1G, you can create rotary motion. If you think about what this means is, it's one thing to say, wow, we could have, free energy. Well, we know that kind of thermodynamics, you're like, you can't get something out of nothing. Well, this is actually mathematically goes back to the quantum vacuum. And so Finbair kind of joked in there and he said, hey, this is, Tesla knew about this stuff, right? This is the ether. Well, that's what we're coming back to, right? This old particle model that Einstein had that basically threw out Tesla's thoughts about the ether. Well, I mean, I don't know how many hundreds of years, everyone assumed there was this ether. Well, you don't have to go very far when you think about things like neutrinos, right? Neutrinos, hundreds or billions or trillions of them are going through our bodies at all times, and they're massless, and there's different types of them. And we put billions of dollars into the North Pole or South Pole, wherever the big ice cube is, to detect these neutrinos. That basically what they're saying is there is another substance that we have always been moving through. And that substance is like how we see water or air. We just haven't had the ore. We haven't had the thing that pushes off against it. And so we've been distracted over the years because of essentially ion wind. And he said we took the voltage down so that we didn't have this leakage. Because I think what's been distracting people in this area of asymmetric capacitors is the fact that they've had this ion wind that pushes in the reverse direction. So this is a tremendous breakthrough. And there's a patent that's going to be coming out from Charles Buhler, because this one that they're talking about came out in 2018. This is before they got across the 1G barrier. They're now talking about liquids or potentially, I mean, can you imagine painting something on the surface of an object and creating a propulsive force? That's like as science fiction as it gets, but that's the stuff that's happening here. But I believe that this breakthrough, what this really suggests is there's so much more energy in the background quantum field, which mathematically they basically have to zero out. And you've probably heard this before. They said there's enough energy in a cup of coffee. So imagine a coffee cup, just take in all, it's empty, right? All that's in it is air, but that amount of essentially space-time has enough energy in it to boil the world's oceans. That's basically what is there mathematically. And so if we have the ability, like Tesla said, to attach ourselves to the very wheel work of nature. And that's what Tesla said. He said, one day we will attach ourselves to the very wheel work of nature. I believe this is it. And that's a big deal. But you're going to see this stuff development over time. And to me, imagine what the implications of this are. Okay. Let's assume that the implications of this technology is one in which you could live anywhere and have essentially unlimited energy, right? Let's say some apparatus, some design comes out, and maybe you got a box in your garage and it just runs. You don't need solar, you don't need wind, you don't need, these things. You might need some batteries. You might need to be able to store this stuff so that you can use it. But this whole world that we have, if you look at the wars that we've fought, it's based on a scarcity model. And when we look out into nature, we see abundance. Well, energy is a really big part of why there is enslavement, right? There are those that have and those that have not. And when you think about the ability to have unlimited free energy, you don't have to be near the coast or in a zone that has really good wind or have solar all the time, that this is actually something that's essentially background energy, right? The quantum field. This changes everything in our society. And it's crazy that we live in a time where we've got AI and where AI is going. We've got all of this change in the financial system with crypto and other things. But now add into the mix a new energy source that's always been there. And if you're kind of weird like me, you go, it's very possible that prior to the flood, they knew about this. But to think that we are coming into an understanding of something that's always been there, we just haven't had the mechanisms in which we could essentially create a bias with that substance. And it makes you actually feel like we're not as advanced as we think we are. So let's continue with this.
And stacking it. So once we stack things, obviously the thrust goes way up. But this is the thrust per thruster mass. And the thruster mass is very, very thin, very, very small materials. They're not even metallic. So these things can get very, very light. And we're only, we're still baby stepping it because we're still in the DC world. So as we get higher and higher with the AC, we think there are other ways that AC can help us, not just the increasing our force, but also changing its direction. So theoretically, there's a lot more that we can root out. And that's kind of how we do this. That's kind of how we approach this. Well, if A works, B should work. And if B works, C should work. If C works, D should work. So we're just kind of going down the path. And so far, everything has, we've been lucky, knock on wood, following the physics. It's been just doing what it's supposed to do. If you say you're making a battery this way, if you say you're making a thin film this way, if you say you're turbocharging an insulator that way, if you say you're microscopically etching a surface that way, or making an asymmetrical capacitor that way, you should get a certain amount of thrust. And we've seen that. So we're just basically just following the progression of the science. And where it tops out, I don't really know. I think we'll hit the breakdown of materials at some point where the materials just cannot pack up any more charge. We'll hit the dielectric strength of the insulators. That's bound to happen. We always test to breakdown. We're not making new materials for this. Okay, that's one thing. We're not inventing new materials. We're using common techniques and common materials, and we'll hit the limits there eventually. And then we'll have to move on to more sophisticated power systems. The AC part, the high frequency stuff. We'll move on to that. We may have to move on to things that are a little bit more elaborate, terahertz frequencies, those kinds of things. Those are all kind of on the docket, if you will. There's probably half a dozen things that we definitely like to explore if we had a blank check, and there'd be different doors, different ways of doing it. There's, we haven't knocked out all of them. We've got 6 or 8 that we want to explore, but right now we're doing what we can afford.
On utilizing.
Could you imagine, folks? Could you imagine if, this next bull run that, you think about who the crypto, gazillionaires are, and, I feel like we're really far from it right now. But, remember Mad Energy came in, and I believe that they raised like $80 million or something. And it was a lot of people that were in crypto. You think about how things are changing with the financial side. Well, what's the point of having these resources, right? I think about Richard talking about longevity, for example. Well, this is an area, you imagine, let's say in the next 5 years, that the people that are funding breakthrough technologies like this it's not the government, right? It's you and me. It's folks that have done really well in crypto, and they're saying, hold on, I want to be a part of creating an abundant future. I want to create a future that's not enslaving people. I think that's at the very, very core of what we're doing with the Pulse Chain, right? We're creating an alternative financial system that is not oppressive. But if you think about that oppression as it relates to the financial world, which is an enslaving, right, debt and consumer slavery, well, what does it look like if we're to take those resources and invest in things that are about, freeing the captives? One of my concerns is that this is already patented, right? Classical guy comes out of NASA. He's the subject matter expert in electrostatics. But why I'm even doing this stream is because of the physics and the math. He's discovered something new, and it changes, it really actually puts the background, kind of the quantum fluctuations or the quantum field up front, because up till now, this whole 0 point energy stuff and everything has really been, the people that are talking about it don't have the credibility, right? They're kind of kooky. And to have somebody that's actually legitimate saying, hey, we're not over promoting this. And this is what I like about Charles Buhler. He's like, hey, we're going to go where this thing goes. And we're doing the work. And he knows how to do it that way. His wife is actually an expert physicist in RF, or radio frequency. And so this is a really interesting team and a really interesting group. But I know that the key to this is financing. And so I think it'd be really cool. I would love to be a part of, helping essentially, develop this technology so that it can be given away to the world. Because in my opinion, the future isn't about controlling the access to energy. It's not about metering it. It's about giving it away. Because this quantum background field, ultimately, you can't patent that, right? It's like saying, I've patented water or air. You can't do that. And I think there's a very similar thing happening here, is that we're going to understand what are the materials, what are the geometries, what are the designs that engage with this background ether, if you will, or 0 point energy or quantum fluctuation. So it's very, very cool. So let's jump into a new section of this video so you can hear more, because this is, fantastic. So this is forced duration and applied charge.
mistaken. But because this is DC and because it's capacitive in nature, I think that thrust or the propulsive force lasts as long as it is charged, right? And so,
Correct.
if I guess the takeaway that I had from that was the overall energy input is a lot less because you don't have to run constant energy through it. You can basically charge it like a capacitor, and as long as that charge remains, you will have this thrust. So, in terms of efficiency, this is a lot higher than even this chart might suggest.
Yeah, efficiency would be hard to describe mathematically. Um, the energy conservation over length of time is hard to rationalize. We have to prove that is the case in space. Does it stay on forever? Right now, when we charge up these capacitors, even the old large heavy foam ones, we can charge them, turn it off, but there's charge that remains inside. So as the charge remains inside, that creates the field. As long as the field is there, the thrust is there. So we can see some of these things sit on a scale for days, and they still have charge in them. They're still producing thrust. It's very hard to reconcile from a scientific point of view because it does seem to violate a lot of energy laws that we have. But this is fundamental. So understanding this will kind of get us an idea of what is the structure of space-time. What is it? Because it's interacting with it in a way we don't quite fully understand. So it's easy to make these things, and it's a tool for the scientific community to use to try to explore those hard questions, I think. And you can't deny this. There's not a lot to this. You're charging up Teflon and copper tape and foam, and you have this thrust. So it gives a nice way to do an inexpensive test, just like the lifters were for many years, to explain ion winds and all of that. The same kind of thing can be used in a classroom to describe whatever force the scientific community decides that this actually is. I think it's just a simple electric field because there's nothing else going on other than electric fields. There's no magnetic fields. It's DC. Is it warping space-time? Goodness, I can't imagine that it is. Maybe it is. I don't have the tools to check that, interferometry or cesium clocks or something like that. That's far more elaborate than we've explored. But there is something to be said about having a field, an electric field in space, because no one knows what an electric field really is. But what happens if you have an asymmetrical electric field in space? What are its consequences? Well, it looks like force is one of its consequences. So this gets into the whole thing of the 0-point energy and all of that jazz. So
at this point, some of the audience may have concerns about conservation of energy. And again, this is something that you addressed in your presentation. Charging this up and having it produce propulsive force with kind of a standing charge, right? Where the energy is already put in, you're not putting in more energy. That make people nervous, I guess. But from what I understand, there may be relativistic explanations for this based on hidden momentum. There could also potentially be quantum mechanical explanations that are related to the Casimir effect, right? Those are two models that you talked about in the presentation.
So yeah, the hidden momentum is a relativistic effect that occurs when you have moving charges or you have magnetic fields. So anytime you have a current loop in any form or fashion, you'll have a hidden momentum. These static systems, I don't believe, have hidden momentum. Charges embedded into plastic, I don't believe, are moving relativistic speeds. People could argue with that, but I don't think there's a hidden momentum. The hidden momentum would give an impulse. It wouldn't give a sustained force because it's not changing with time. So I kind of rule out the hidden momentum. The Casimir force and all of that is, I think, is a great example, I think, of how you can use quantum mechanics and the quantum vacuum fluctuations to give you a net force on a system. Or even if it's a not net translation, it's a force of two plates. And that can easily be interpreted as pressure of the plates. Same math. So it's a model. It's there. The question is, how do we humans, we inject energy way above the vacuum energy? Because that's where we are, way above it. Vacuum's way down here low. How do we take advantage of that low energy? And is that what's happening? It has to be what's happening because we have interaction physics. We have scattering. We have Coulomb forces. We have, anytime you have a field, you'll have a force. Gravity doesn't turn off. Coulomb forces don't turn off. If I separate the charges, they don't just turn off because you want them to. This is another force that doesn't turn off because you want it to. So there is an interaction going on there. Microscopically, it's going to take a physicist much smarter than me probably to come up with that and derive all of that. But I think the QED is there. I think there's enough there that someone can look at that and say, well, this is probably what's happening. If you can explain how the Coulomb force stays on over a length of time, you could probably explain how this stays on over a length of time. All the matrix elements for the scattering are there developed. So it's something I'm looking on in my spare time, but just it takes a lot of time to redo QED.
What's really incredible about this, and I just want to insert just for a second here, I love his approach to things, but this is, it's very rare that we have something that we're kind of seeing in real time, if you will. That here's this private company, a guy formerly with NASA, who's doing these experiments. He's very practical, and in a lot of cases, these are somewhat accidental that he's seeing these things. And then he takes the distance, right? He's been able to do this since 2016. And to see new physics, or at least existing understanding of physics, be challenged by experimentation, to me is fascinating, right? Because that's how most things actually advance. It's not like just some theoretical physicist comes up. No, it's happened in some cases, certainly Einstein stuff with special relativity and, having eclipses and seeing light bend. But this is where, like, there's a ton of action, right? Because if you look at a lot of the material science innovations and you look at, a lot of these things came from trying to explain what somebody's experiencing experimentally. And so I'm fascinated with this. You may not think this is interesting, but I think this is super interesting that we're seeing somebody who's just a guy's going, hey, I'm noticing these things. We're just going where it leads us. And the implications of it are absolutely tremendous. And to think that we have this communication method where, this guy, Tim Ventura, who's an incredible interviewer, is basically going, hey, let's hear about it. Let's hear what you're doing. In the past, you'd have to like be in some sort of club and you'd have to go to some fancy place and go to a convention to listen to this stuff. And here it is on YouTube. And I just wanted to bring it to you because to me, I love talking about the alien stuff and hey, this is happening with David Grush in front of Congress or whatever. But when you see people like this that are going, hey, there's some things that we don't quite understand. And when we're dealing with, propellantless propulsion and the fact that it's already exceeded 1G, I always thought about flying cars when I was a kid. I'm like, is that actually in our future? And there's a possibility that it is. But if you do tie it together with the whole UFO thing, you're like, well, there's these tic tac objects that are moving in our skies with impunity. They clearly have a technology beyond us. So there's an indication that it's actually available. Well, what are the implications to us? And so it makes me think, is it possible that what disclosure isn't aliens? What disclosure is this? Because you want to upset an apple cart. It's one thing to have some sort of ontological shock to go, oh no, we're not alone. It's even bigger to say, we've been holding free energy from the people for 90 plus years. That's really the implications. And who's to blame for that? Right? That we've actually been keeping this hidden so that we can extract value from you. Like I go to the gas pump and I'm like, hey, it's $3.67 a gallon. Like, well, all this inflation on all these things. We're coming into an era, folks, where boy, disruption, everything from the financial system, this thing's going to literally fail under its own weight. But when I see stuff like this, I'm like, this reminds me that, hold on a second, look at creation. It's abundant, folks. What if we were aligned with this stuff? And this is where I really see the implications of crypto. Crypto, I mean, money's a tool, folks. You know that. What you do with that, okay, get your Lambo, right? You got your Lambo. Now let's talk about actually making life better for people. Well, what does that look like? Now, you could also be a devil's advocate and you could say, hey, I mean, this could be used for military. If you can change the gravity of things, and I mean, you could propel very heavy things very, very quickly and kill a lot of people. So you have to be cautious. But the implications of this from an energy perspective to me says, it's one thing to have solar cells. I mean, but it's another thing to say, no, we're actually attaching to the very wheelwork of nature. Let's keep going.
Now, I understand that there are at least 2 outside groups that have verified this effect as well. In addition to, and again, this goes back to, we have decades of anecdotal stories of propulsive forces that you might almost call noise range, right? Where like T.T. Brown, where he's like, okay, we have something, but it comes and goes. People have difficulty replicating it the whole 9 yards. You have a couple verifications as well. So this isn't just your team. This is something that you're able to kind of group, I guess, a cluster of different verifications in with, right?
I would say so. I mean, we've known that once the patent came out, we know Mark's lab took it over and said, well, this is a picture of a heat sink in our patent. So we just took a computer heat sink and measure a force with that. It's that simple and it works. There's other examples out there. And even the 2-dimensional examples, there's some out there. So there's a lot of evidence out there for this. And there might be even others that we just haven't uncovered yet. Like I described, there's the EM drive, which I think can easily be explained with this physics. It's an RF version. We haven't done the RF version yet, but it makes a heck of a lot of sense. The Mach effect thruster, that could be just based on its geometry and its voltage. It could be another example of this force that could be, the Mach effect might be real, but it could possibly be that this force is entangled with it or masks it, or vice versa. I don't know. But can't ignore this force. So you have to look at the world now. What I'm trying to get the scientific communities to look at this force now. Now put this in the context of what you know already. How does it fit in? How does it play in? And it can play a role in many things, even a role in gravity, in dark energy, in dark matter. When you look at the conservation of energy that I started with, that fluctuation of the E squared is not allowed to be zero. You cannot put zero in there according to quantum mechanics. So there has to be some remnant energy, hence force density that's acting on everything, everywhere. So what are its implications? That's not my theory. The people have come up with that 50 years ago. They probably just didn't know that they could take advantage of that for what we're doing when you go above the 0 point. So I think that's all we're doing. So that's what makes it exciting. I think it's a good opportunity for people to run these tests, look at them, watch them go in space, watch them move in space, and then say, well, what does it imply? What does it imply? What are the implications? How does it mess my experiment up? How does it describe this effect or that effect? Because that's usually what a discovery does. It starts opening a light on 20 other different things that the researcher didn't even think about looking at. And I think this electrostatic pressure defying force thing, it's incredibly weak, but it could explain maybe some big things without us knowing it. So until we know, we can't even think about testing something like this. But now we know this exists. Now we know it's real. What does it imply? What are its implications? How do we take advantage of them? Of course, our group and our friends at APEC want to make spaceships. That's what everyone wants to do. We want to get off the Earth. That's fantastic. It's a great use for this.
One thing I think is important to note is he mentioned that one of the other labs that picked this up is he named Mark, this guy that he is picked up his patent. They took a heat sink. If you know what a heat sink is, it's basically just a chunk of aluminum that's stuck onto the chip to keep it cool, right? It's got fins on it. He said they charged up a heat sink, just a standard heat sink from a computer, and obviously in a vacuum, it had a force. I think what's really cool about this is you think about when you discover something that's underlying or fundamental in, asymmetric capacitance and all this, that really a lot of patents become around design patents, right? So you think about, Apple doesn't own the rights to telephonic communication. They don't own the telephone, right? They own the design for the iPhone. And what is so exciting to me about all of this is, one, the money's changing, but two, smart people around the world are going to be able to look at this type of stuff and say, all right, I'm going to embody this in a new way. I'm going to use physics this way. I'm going to go research these type of things, and I'm going to create this type of application for this. That's what's so exciting to me, is that we're discovering it's not really, I don't think it's new physics. I think it's just a new method and a new understanding of things that haven't been clear. We still don't have a unified theory between electromagnetics and gravity. There's not a unified field theory. And so this could lead to that. He talked about the implications on gravity. He talked about the implications on, space travel. I mean, there's so many different things that it got implications for. What I'm interested in, and I think is a big key to really changing the very nature of civilized society, is energy itself. So let's jump back in.
But there could be others too. We could make energy out of the vacuum. You can make force, you can make energy. I haven't looked at how to do that yet. Not out of the question. Not something we spend a lot of time on. But someone will. Someone absolutely will. And we're here to help.
Well, again, Charlie, this is all tremendously exciting. I view this as a major breakthrough, and this comes after hard work and diligent effort. I mean, you guys have done the work over a period of time to get here. This isn't something that just appeared. And again, I mean, your credentials and the careful experimentation you've done have ruled out the common sources of error that have plagued this area for decades. So on that note, let me thank you so much for your time today. It has been a true pleasure and absolutely an honor to have you with me.
All right, I want to give a big shout out to Tim Ventura, who he had a website that I used to follow for years and years called American Anti-Gravity. He's been interviewing so many people, and a big shout out to him. He's been in it since the beginning. And then, of course, obviously, him putting together that video that we've basically, shared here. I want to share that link to that interview. I'm going to put that into the chat right now. And I also want to say inside of that video, so if you just type in Charles Buhler and Tim Ventura, and it's Buhler. If you're interested in digging into this, you can find the patent on Google Patents. You can watch that video. But I think more interestingly, if you want to dig into this, they've linked he did like a symposium, an online symposium where he walked through, I don't know, 100 different slides. He went through the math. He went through, basically way more detail than that had. And I've watched that several times, and it's just, the implications are tremendous. And so I love occasionally indulging myself with you in this, because I think there's some people out in the crypto space that are like, this is what really blows my hair back, is the fact that things are changing, not just authoritarians on the rise and people enslaving us, but actually things that could be helpful. And I just want to, as a kind of a final comment, I just want to remind you what I've learned, and that is all tools are neutral. Okay. All tools are neutral. Let's say you got a hammer sitting on a table. Well, a hammer could, I don't know, you could hang a picture, right? Put a nail in the wall and hang a picture, but you could also kill your neighbor, right? Every single tool has a nature and character that animates it. And that is done by people like us. So as we look at this abundance in crypto or whatever it is that you're doing, when you think about whatever tool you're animating, whether it's AI, the internet, a hammer, it's taking on your nature and character. And the question really is, what is your nature and character? And so as I see, what's happened in this last, crypto cycle, and I saw so many good people do so well in crypto. And, I think our hopes are that everyone feels the same way. They're like, oh man, when the next bull run? When's Richard going to deploy the SAC funds? When's this all going to move up? Why are we waiting so long and going so sideways? It's really a tool that enables things. And the question is, are we going to come together? And that's ultimately why we created the Compassion Cartel, and why, in this channel, I want to bring together a group of people who go, you know what? I'm not just here for me. If you're just here for you and you're not considerate of others, I mean, there's plenty of meme coins. There's plenty of paid groups that you can go in and steal money from people. And that's the thing that's been a challenge to me. I started doing this streaming, 2+ years ago, and, super excited about it, right? This asymmetry of returns, right? Big bags, diamond hands, when Lambo. And the more and more I thought about it, the more and more I realized that in crypto, you think that these are just gains. Well, these gains come from somewhere. Well, where do they come from? And people talk about it. The weak hands are serving the people that have the diamond hands. But those are people, right? And we understand leverage trading, right? We understand, leverage trading is you stealing from the guy on the other end of the computer. Well, in a strange sort of way, the system is that way right now in crypto too. This crypto casino is really about people that are in the know colluding and taking money from the dumb, right? And I think a lot of people justify it, and they're like, well, you know what? I lost my shirt in crypto when I first got in. They need to do the same thing. But instead of us just taking, the sum of our, collective energies, which would be the money that we put in, and kind of trading it back and forth through meme coins, what if we have a system which unlocks, right? It unlocks resources. And I think a big part of that is, how do we deploy these resources in a way that are really fundamentally aligning themselves with the abundance of creation? And here we have an example of that. Charles Buhler, who I think actually at some point in the future will have the Nobel Prize, if you even care about that, because of this and these discoveries and the implications of them for the future. Let's say in 20 years, battery tech's going to change, financial tech obviously changing. We're going to see propulsion, we're going to see free energy, we're going to see, AI probably become super intelligent. We're going to see all of the things that are hidden be essentially exposed, and the things that people have done in darkness, right, that have done with evil forces, is going to be exposed. And it just reminds me that, hey, this kingdom that they talk about may be coming sooner than you think. So Folks, take care of yourself, take care of others, be considerate of others in addition to yourself. And hey, this incredible breakthrough. And don't mess with Texas. Take care, everybody. See you soon.